They say the sharpest blade is never the one hanging in the kitchen, but the one hidden in the hands of someone you love most. I learned that bitter truth when my own son and his wife smiled sweetly in my presence while hiding daggers behind their backs, waiting for the right moment to strike. And the cruelest cut of all was that they used my little granddaughter as bait to lead me into their trap. Before I tell you everything that unfolded, I want to ask one small thing. Please subscribe to this channel and let me know in the comments where in the world you are listening from. They say the joy of old age is sitting at the table surrounded by your children and grandchildren, hearing their laughter fill a house full of light. For 69 years I believed that. I thought the years of struggle and sacrifice had been worth it. Until one bright afternoon in Washington, when a trembling whisper from my 9-year-old granddaughter shattered everything I believed about family. That day, the sky was an endless blue, and the cedar trees around the neighborhood whispered softly in the wind. My old sedan rolled up the driveway of my son Michael's large suburban home, the ground covered with pale pink petals from blooming cherry blossoms. My heart was light, because it was Lily's birthday, my only grandchild. The house radiated warmth. Music played in the background. The smell of grilled food drifted through the backyard, and the air was full of cheerful chatter. Neighbors mingled with relatives, wine glasses clinking, children laughing. It should have been the happiest scene for a grandfather, but fate has a way of twisting joy into a wound that never closes. The moment I stepped inside, my daughter-in-law Clara came rushing out. Her smile was wide, her voice sugary, fat. "Her Henry, what a joy that you're here. This party wouldn't be complete without you." I froze for a second. Clara, who usually greeted me with cold politeness, suddenly sounded as if I were the guest of honor. I forced a smile and handed her a silver-wrapped gift box containing the Lego set Lily had begged for months. Before I could even set down my coat, a pink blur came rushing down the staircase. Lily, in her frilly dress, with golden hair bouncing in the light, ran into my arms. "Grandpa, you came!" she squealed, squeezing me tight. My heart softened instantly. I kissed the top of her head, which still smelled of her kids' shampoo, and gave her the box. Her eyes lit up as she tore the paper, shrieking with delight when she saw the Statue of Liberty Lego set inside. But then, just as quickly, her smile faltered. Her eyes darted nervously toward her parents. She forced a shaky grin and whispered words that turned my blood cold. "Grandpa, tonight, they're going to take all of your money." For a moment I could not breathe. The music, the laughter, the smell of roasted meat, all of it faded into a dull silence. My hands trembled so badly that the wine in my glass rippled like waves. I looked at Lily's face, her blue eyes glistening with tears, her small shoulders shaking. This was not the careless imagination of a child. This was fear. I bent down, smoothed her hair, and whispered softly, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm here. No one will take anything from me." She gave a quick nod, then darted back toward the other children, leaving me standing alone with a storm raging in my chest. I wanted to believe her instantly because Lily had never lied to me, yet a voice in the back of my mind urged caution. Children sometimes overhear adult conversations and misunderstand them. I couldn't convict my son and his wife on the fragile words of a frightened child, not yet, so I forced my trembling hand to lift the wine, smiled faintly at a neighbor, and told myself I would watch closely. If there was a plot, it would reveal itself tonight. I sat quietly at the table, letting the guests chatter around me, but my thoughts drifted back to the years since my wife Margaret passed away. 3 years had gone by, yet her last words to me still echoed like a warning bell. In that hospital room, heavy with the smell of antiseptic, her hand grew colder in mine as she whispered, "Henry, take care of Lily, but watch Michael. He's weak, and weakness makes him dangerous." At the time, I had dismissed it as the anxiety of a dying woman. Michael was my son, my blood. Surely love and family could mend weakness. But now, after Lily's trembling confession, Margaret's words cut into me like glass. I thought of the money I had poured out in those 3 years, always telling myself it was for family. Just 1 month after the funeral, Michael had come to me with red eyes, saying the bank was about to repossess his house in Spokane. Without hesitation, I wrote a check for $35,000, thinking I would choose as saving my son from ruin. A couple months later, Clara called me in tears, saying their car had broken down and repairs would cost more than $7,000. Again, I reached for my wallet. When Lily was accepted into a private academy, the tuition was more than $20,000 a year, but I paid it gladly. Each time, I told myself it was for Lily's future, for my son's dignity. But as the years rolled by, the requests never stopped. Roof repairs, failed investments, sudden medical expenses. Quietly, almost without realizing, more than $140,000 had slipped from my accounts into their hands. And now, according to my granddaughter's whisper, they were not finished. They wanted it all. I tried to steady my breathing, but my chest felt heavy as stone. It wasn't just Lily's frightened whisper that weighed on me. It was the sudden realization that my son and his wife had been bleeding me dry for years. Looking back, every request had seemed urgent, desperate, wrapped in the cloak of family need. But when I placed them side by side, they formed a pattern too neat, too consistent, to be coincidence. I remembered the leaking roof incident. Clara had stood in my kitchen, sighing heavily, speaking of rain dripping over Lily's bed. "Dad, we just don't know how we'll manage," she had said, her voice thick with practiced despair. $6,000 left my account that same afternoon. Another time, Michael had come to me with shaking hands, asking for help with an opportunity, a friend's project that needed investors. "It's a sure thing, Dad," he had insisted. $15,000 disappeared into that illusion, never to return. And when Clara's mother had a sudden medical emergency, they told me the hospital bill had crushed them. I reached into my savings again, $12,000 that time. All of it, piled together, was staggering. By my calculations, more than $140,000 had slipped through my fingers in just 3 years. A fortune built from decades of sweat and hard work. Money I thought I was investing in the future of my family, but now I could see it more clearly. My generosity had only sharpened their hunger, and the whispers of suspicion grew louder the more I thought back. There had been times Clara visited me unannounced, bringing a small cake or tea, but her eyes were always moving, studying every corner of my house. One afternoon, she casually remarked, "Father Henry, this home is far too big for one man. There are wonderful retirement communities these days. You would never feel lonely, and everything would be taken care of." At the time, I brushed it off with an awkward laugh. But now, replaying it in my head alongside Lily's words, I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I lifted my glass at the party, forcing a smile for anyone who looked my way. But my heart was thundering. If what Lily overheard was true, then all the sacrifices I had made for Michael and Clara were nothing more than rehearsals for the final act, stripping me of everything I had left. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, not without proof. But my instincts, honed from decades of running a construction company, whispered otherwise. You don't spend years reading contracts, negotiating with bankers, and studying human hesitation without learning to smell deceit. And right then, the air in my son's house reeked of it. That night, after the last guest left and the laughter faded, I sat alone in my car outside their glowing home. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the key. Margaret's voice echoed in my mind, colliding with Lily's frightened whisper. "Watch Michael. Don't let him drag everything down." The next morning I woke to the thin light of Washington's spring sun seeping through the blinds, but the warmth did nothing to ease the storm inside me. I brewed my coffee stronger than usual, sat at the oak table staring at Margaret's faded photograph, and tried to convince myself I might have misheard, that perhaps Lily had misunderstood. But the more I tried to brush it aside, the more the pieces from the past began fitting together in ways I could no longer ignore. Later that morning, I went outside to water Margaret's roses. As I bent near the garden bed, the front gate creaked open, and Mrs. Carter, my neighbor of more than 20 years, waved cheerfully with a bag of books in her hand. "Henry," she called, "I bumped into Michael and Clara downtown last week. They looked so serious, carrying a folder full of bank papers. Must have been something important." She chuckled and moved along, not realizing she had just driven a knife deeper into my chest. Bank papers. My son had not breathed a word of it to me. Why would he hide something as simple as finances unless there was more lurking beneath the surface? I nodded politely to Mrs. Carter, hiding my unease, then stood by the roses for a long time, my mind churning. Lily's trembling words, Clara's suggestion about retirement homes, now secret trips to the bank with folders in hand. The picture was becoming painfully sharp. At noon, I called Michael, pretending to invite him to lunch. His response was quick, too quick. Dad, today's not good. Work's busy," he said. Then I heard Clara's voice in the background, sharp and impatient. "Tell him tomorrow. Today isn't convenient." He mumbled a rushed goodbye before I could say another word. I stared at the silent receiver afterward, the unease in my gut twisting tighter. That afternoon, as I drove through the shopping district, I spotted them. Michael and Clara, stepping hurriedly out of First Columbia Bank, a black briefcase in his hand, her lips close to his ear as they whispered urgently. They didn't see me, but I saw them, and I saw the guilt in Michael's slouched shoulders, the nervous twitch of Clara's hand clutching his arm. They looked less like a couple running errands and more like conspirators rushing to cover their tracks. I didn't confront them, not yet. A lifetime in business had taught me patience, and patience had taught me survival. But the resolve hardened inside me that moment. If they were preparing a trap, then I needed to be ready before it closed around me. That evening, just as the sun sank behind the trees and shadows stretched across my study, the phone rang. Michael's voice came through, strained but carefully measured. "Dad, are you free tomorrow? Clara and we'd like to talk about some family matters. Nothing too big, just long-term planning, so you won't have to worry later." Long-term planning. The phrase struck me like a hammer. I heard a faint quiver in his tone, the same tremor he used to have as a boy when he lied about sneaking candy from his mother's purse. Only now, the stakes were not a few coins or treats. They were my entire life's work. I hung up and sat in the dim light, staring at the thick files piled on my desk. 40 years of contracts, invoices, receipts, all the evidence of a life built brick by brick. Each page represented nights I had worked through storms, mornings I had risen before dawn, and sacrifices Margaret had made so we could provide for Michael. And now that same sun was hinting at long-term plans that smelled of legal traps and stolen signatures. Sleep did not come easily that night. I listened to the grandfather clock tick, each sound like a countdown. Margaret's words echoed again. "Watch Michael." I thought of Lily, how her tiny voice had trembled when she whispered her warning. She had no reason to invent such fear. If anything, children often blurt the truth without knowing its weight. When the first pale light of morning broke through, I had already made up my mind. If Michael and Clara believed they could corner me with paperwork and sweet words, they were mistaken. I had not survived decades in the construction business by being naive. I knew the tricks men used when they wanted to force a signature: pressure, confusion, urgency. I had seen it across negotiation tables countless times, and I had learned how to turn those games back on the players. So I poured my coffee, opened the safe that had sat untouched for years, and pulled out every ledger, receipt, and bank statement I had kept. Margaret used to tease me about never throwing away papers, but now I silently thanked her memory. Those dusty folders might be my strongest defense. As I spread the documents across the table, the truth formed itself line by line. The steady slope of requests, from small sums to staggering amounts, each tied with just enough plausibility to disguise greed as need. It was no longer a question of whether they intended to take the rest. It was when, and the moment I signed anything, I knew it would all vanish. I promised myself then I would not be cornered. If they wanted a game of signatures and seals, I would prepare a board of my own. That morning the air was crisp, but inside me burned a cold fire. I pulled out the heavy folders from the safe, the ones I had not touched since Margaret's funeral. Inside were decades of contracts, receipts, canceled checks, and correspondence, evidence of my life's labor. I spread them across the desk until the oak surface vanished under piles of yellowed paper and bank slips. At first I only meant to glance through the last few years, but as I flipped page after page, a pattern emerged as sharp as any blueprint I had ever studied. It started small, 5,000 here, 7,000 there, then larger sums, 12,000 for hospital bills, 15,000 for an investment that evaporated like smoke, 35,000 to save their house. Each entry had seemed reasonable when it was presented to me, always wrapped in desperate eyes and soft words. But lined up together, it was a staircase leading downward, step by step, toward ruin. I pulled out a pencil and began marking the pages. Date, amount, excuse, over and over. Within hours, a cruel picture had taken shape. More than $140,000 had flowed out of my hands in just 3 years, nearly all of it into Michael and Clara's pockets. Not once had they suggested repayment. Not once had they treated it as a loan. It had always been presented as obligation, as if my duty as a father were to bleed until I was dry. As I studied the numbers, I felt my chest tighten, not only with anger but with shame. Shame that I had let my love for family blind me to the obvious. Shame that I had dismissed Margaret's final warning. And shame that Lily, at only 9 years old, had been forced to carry a truth too heavy for her small shoulders. But shame quickly hardened into resolve. I realized I had something Michael and Clara had not counted on: my meticulous habits. Every receipt, every check stub, every transfer was still in my possession. I had enough to prove, to any judge or notary, that I was not senile or incapable, but rather manipulated by those closest to me. If they tried to paint me as weak, I would show the world I was sharper than ever. That evening, as the clock struck 9, I wrote in my notebook, "Begin collecting evidence. Find allies." No longer would I be the gentle old man who opened his wallet without question. If they believed they could trick me with smooth papers and urgent signatures, then they had underestimated the wrong man. I had built houses strong enough to withstand storms. Now I would build a defense strong enough to expose betrayal. The following Sunday morning, just after I finished breakfast, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Clara stood there, holding a basket of steaming muffins, her smile painted as sweet as syrup. "Father Henry, I baked these fresh this morning. Thought you might enjoy them," she said, her tone warm, but her eyes darting around my living room like a hawk scanning prey. I invited her in, watching closely as she set the basket on the glass table. A moment later, Michael walked in behind her, posture stiff, expression rehearsed. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Dad," he said, trying to sound firm but calm, "we're here to talk seriously today. There are things we need to take care of before matters get messy." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my face neutral. "What things?" Michael glanced at Clara, and she immediately pulled a black leather folder from her handbag. She placed it on the table with the precision of a banker, then opened it slowly, revealing the bold title on the first page, "Power of Attorney." I raised my brows. "Power of—" Clara smiled softly, her voice dripping with sugar. "It just means you authorize us to handle the little things for you, paying bills, managing bank accounts, handling paperwork, even medical decisions if necessary. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." Michael leaned forward, urgency creeping into his tone. "Dad, remember last month when you left your car key at the grocery store? You stood locked out in the parking lot for hours, and the doctor's appointment you forgot until the afternoon? These things happen more and more. What if something serious occurs? Who will look after you then?" They were clever, mixing small truths with fear, just enough to make their case sound reasonable. Claire even reached across the table, resting her manicured hand gently on mine. "We've already spoken with a lawyer. A notary can come here at any time. One simple signature, and your life will be easier." It was a performance worthy of a stage, but inside I felt only a cold smile forming. I had seen this act before. Different faces, different contracts, but the same tactics: pressure, urgency, pity. In boardrooms, it had always been about money. Today, it was about my very freedom. I picked up the folder, flipped through a few pages, and read enough to see the poison hidden between the lines. Clauses that handed them control of all financial assets, authority to act without oversight. My entire life, signed away with one stroke of a pen. I set it down gently, looked at them, and spoke with feigned fatigue. "I hear you, but I'm tired today. Tomorrow, I'll read every page carefully. Then we'll discuss." Their smiles faltered, but they had no choice except to nod. For them, it was only a delay. For me, it was the time I needed. The moment the door closed behind Michael and Clara, I carried the folder back to my desk and opened it again. This time, I didn't just skim. I read carefully, line by line. And what I saw confirmed every fear that had taken root in my chest. They hadn't come to help me. They had come to strip me of everything. The clauses were blunt and merciless: authority over every financial asset, permission to sell or transfer property, rights to manage medical care, banking, investments, all without court oversight. In short, I would no longer exist as a man. I would be reduced to a shadow whose life and legacy were controlled by two signatures other than my own. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the papers, feeling both fury and sorrow battling in my chest. My own son, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose school projects I had stayed up late to help finish. Now he stood shoulder to shoulder with a wife who saw me not as family, but as an obstacle to wealth. But then my eyes fell on the bottom of the document, on the empty line where they wanted my pen to bleed away everything. And in that moment the sorrow hardened into steel. I whispered under my breath, "Not yet, not ever." Because in their greed, they had overlooked something. A power of attorney, no matter how carefully drafted, required one thing above all: the principal must be lucid and willing, and the act must be witnessed. They had arranged for a notary, yes, but a notary is no puppet. A notary is a witness, and a witness can speak the truth. I realized then that if they wanted a game of signatures, I would make sure the game was played on my board, not theirs. I pulled a fresh notebook from the drawer and wrote 3 names. First, Samuel Wright, Deputy Director of Columbia First Bank, an old acquaintance of mine who owed me more than a few favors. Second, Karen Ellis, an independent notary with a reputation as sharp as her pen. And third, Lily, though she would not be dragged into the fight unless absolutely necessary. Her innocence was the reason I was doing all of this. I tucked the incriminating documents into a separate drawer, locked it, and wrote in bold across the cover of my notebook. Counterplan. Tomorrow I would call Samuel. I would call Karen. And when Michael and Clara returned, thinking they could finally corner me, they would walk straight into a stage I had prepared just for them. That night, for the first time since Margaret's passing, I felt something different stirring inside me. Not just grief or suspicion, but purpose. They thought I was a weary old man, too tired to resist. They had no idea I was only beginning. The next morning, I made the calls. Samuel answered first, his voice steady as always. When I explained the situation, there was a long pause, then a low whistle. "Henry, they're trying to bury you alive in paperwork. Don't worry, I'll be there. Bring the documents, and we'll show them what real oversight looks like." Later that afternoon, Karen Ellis agreed as well. She had notarized contracts for me years ago, and she still remembered how meticulous I was. "If they try to force a signature, I'll be watching every detail. You won't stand alone." By the time Sunday arrived, I was ready. I brewed my coffee early, set the long oak table, and laid out 3 neat folders, one containing my ledger of every dollar I had given Michael and Clara, another with the power of attorney they had tried to slip into my hands, and the last, a copy of my old will, the one only I knew about. Beside the folders sat Samuel with his stack of bank records, and Karen with her heavy leather ledger. At exactly 10, the doorbell rang. Michael and Clara stepped inside, their faces bright, their smiles stretched too wide. Clara placed the leather folder on the table with a flourish. "Dad, today we can finish everything. Just a quick signature, and you'll never have to stress again." Michael nodded quickly, avoiding my eyes, his hands rubbing together as if he were already clutching the prize. I slid the power of attorney across the table toward Karen. "You call this taking care of me. Tell me, Karen, what does this document actually mean?" Karen adjusted her glasses, scanned the page, and said evenly, "It means the signer hands over control of all financial and ethical decisions. Once signed, your son and his wife would have full legal authority. The prerequisite is that the signer is lucid and willing." Clara tried to laugh, but the sound was brittle. "Of course he's lucid. We only want to help." Before I could answer, Samuel cleared his throat and set down a separate folder. "Interesting, because just last week, the 2 of you came to my office asking about emergency guardianship. That process is used only when someone lacks capacity. Why would you need that if all you wanted was to help your father?" Michael's face drained of color. Clara's smile froze, the muscles in her jaw twitching. We were only asking questions," she muttered, her voice unsteady. I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Questions? 3 years. I've paid over $140,000. House, car, tuition, hospital bills. I never hesitated. And this is how you repay me? By plotting to take what remains?" The room fell silent. For the first time, their act cracked. And in that silence, I knew the game had shifted. They thought they had trapped me. Instead, they had walked straight into my snare. That night, long after the confrontation at my house, their own home glowed late into the evening. From across the street, I could see the restless movements of shadows behind their curtains. Inside, the celebration of Lily's birthday was a distant memory. The air was thick with tension, heavy enough to choke. Michael paced the living room like a man walking toward the edge of a cliff. His hands tugged at his hair, his eyes red with sleeplessness. Clara sat rigid on the couch, arms crossed, her glass of wine trembling with each sharp breath. Finally, Michael broke the silence. "Don't you see? He's changed. Dad said it himself. He'll reconsider the will. If he rewrites it, we'll have nothing. Nothing, Clara. And the mortgage is already 3 months overdue. The credit cards, 40,000 at least. The hospital bills from last year, they're still unpaid. If he cuts us off, we'll drown." Clara slammed the glass down so hard the wine sloshed over the rim. Her voice was icy. "No, we cannot let that happen. We've lived off his support for years. If he cuts us off now, this house, our lives, everything collapses. What about Lily? Do you want her pulled from that academy and sent to some rundown public school? Do you want us begging in front of neighbors who already think we're failures? Michael dropped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Maybe Dad's right. Maybe we've taken too much already. We should try to stand on our own. Clara's eyes flashed, sharp and unforgiving. She leaned forward, her voice like the crack of a whip. Stand on our own? With this mountain of debt? With your mediocre salary? Don't be naive, Michael. That man has everything, and if he won't hand it over willingly, then we make him understand. We force him. Michael lifted his head, stunned. Force him? How? Clara leaned closer, her whisper cold enough to freeze the room. His weakness dead. S isn't money, it's Lily. If he won't give us control, then he won't see her. We'll send her to a boarding school far away. We'll tell her stories about her grandfather. Greedy, selfish, keeping everything for himself. We'll make her believe he doesn't love her. That will break him, and then he'll choose. Either sign or lose her. Michael's lips trembled. She's our daughter, Clara. We can't use her like that. Her glare cut him down like a blade. She is our future, and if your father stands in the way of it, then he'll learn that love comes at a price. Upstairs, Lily shifted in her bed, clutching her doll in her sleep, blissfully unaware of the cruel plan forming just below her. The next day, just after noon, the phone rang. Michael's voice came through, unsteady but trying to sound casual. Dad, could you come over this afternoon? Clara and we want to talk more about family matters, and about Lily's schooling. You'll want to hear this. I could hear Clara's sharp whisper in the background, urging him on. A knot formed in my stomach, but I agreed. For Lily's sake, I would go. When I arrived, the two-story house was strangely quiet. No children's laughter, no birthday decorations, just silence. Clara opened the door, her smile thin and brittle. Father Henry, please come in. We have some important decisions to make. In the living room, the table was bare except for a stack of neatly arranged papers and a pen laid carefully on top. Michael sat rigid in his chair, his eyes downcast, hands clenched as if he were holding onto the last threads of his conscience. Clara remained standing, her arms folded, her eyes gleaming with cold resolve. She began without pretense. Dad, you disappointed us the other day, bringing outsiders into a family matter, humiliating us like that. Do you understand what you're doing? If you change the will, if you cut us off, we'll have nothing left. Nothing to raise Lily, nothing to keep this house standing. Do you really want to see your own family collapse? I inhaled deeply, keeping my voice calm. Clara, all I want is honesty. I've given you chance after chance to change. You still have time. Her face hardened, her words snapping like frost. No, time is up. The bills, the debt, the creditors, they don't wait. If you cut us off now, you're pushing us over a cliff, and we won't let that happen. Michael shifted, his voice soft but pleading. Clara. But she cut him off with a hiss. Then she leaned closer to me, her eyes sharp as daggers. Father Henry, your weakness isn't money. It's Lily. That little girl adores you. But if you don't sign these papers, we'll make sure she doesn't anymore. We'll move her to a boarding school in Seattle. She won't see you. And when she asks why, we'll tell her the truth. That her grandfather is selfish, greedy, that he kept everything for himself and left nothing for his family. The words struck me harder than any blow. My heart twisted at the thought of Lily's innocent eyes filled with lies, her small hands reaching for me only to be told I had abandoned her. I looked at Michael, desperate to see him object, but he sat frozen, his lips trembling, unable to speak. I swallowed the lump in my throat and whispered, I understand. And, give me time. At the next family gathering, when everyone is present, I will sign and hand things over, but never, never use Lily against me again. Clara's lips curled into a thin smile of triumph. Michael exhaled as if relieved. They thought they had won. But deep inside, I knew I had only played my part in their script. The real performance was yet to come. In the days that followed, the atmosphere around the family shifted like the air before a storm. Clara moved through her days with a new confidence, her voice soft but edged with the certainty of victory. Michael's anxious frown disappeared, replaced with a rare cheerfulness I hadn't seen in years. He even called me one evening, his tone almost celebratory. Dad, thank you. You don't know how much this means to us. I'll make sure the day goes smoothly. Everyone will finally see things fall into place. News spread quickly. Relatives who rarely called suddenly reached out, their voices tinged with curiosity and excitement. Within a week, invitations were circulating. Father Henry will be signing everything over. The words traveled from mouth to mouth, as though it were a milestone worth celebrating. For them, it was an event. For me, it was a battlefield. I spent those days not in surrender but in preparation. Each morning I brewed my coffee, sat at my desk, and refined the plan. The documents were ready, my ledger of every dollar handed over, copies of the power of attorney they had tried to push on me, and most importantly, the new draft of my will. A will they knew nothing about. A will that placed every cent, every brick, every acre of land into a trust for Lily, safe from the greedy hands of her parents. Karen, the notary, confirmed she would attend. "I'll bring my ledger. Everything will be documented," she assured me. Samuel, steady as always, promised to sit beside her with the official bank records. "When the time comes, we'll expose them," he said. I nodded, feeling the old strength in my veins, the strength of a man who had negotiated contracts worth millions, who had built a legacy with his bare hands, and who would not see it dismantled by his own blood without a fight. The night before the so-called celebration, I walked through my home slowly, stopping in front of the framed wedding photo of Margaret and me. Her smile looked out at me, warm and unwavering, and I whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll keep my promise. I'll protect Lily, and I'll protect what we built together." When the morning finally came, my villa was lit up brighter than it had been in years. The long table was draped in white cloth, crystal glasses set in neat rows, and by the fireplace stood that same photo of Margaret, watching over what was about to unfold. Relatives arrived in groups, chattering with excitement, unaware they were about to witness not a handover, but a reckoning. By early evening, the house was alive with chatter. Relatives filled the rooms, their voices rising and falling like waves, glasses of wine clinking as though they were at a wedding. The scent of roasted lamb and garlic drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the perfume boom of excited women and the sharp cologne of men who had come not just to witness, but to gossip, to measure what they might one day gain. Clara moved among them in a striking crimson dress, her smile wide, her hands clasping each guest's with false warmth. "Today is an important day," she announced again and again, her voice carrying pride like a trophy. "From now on, Father Henry won't need to worry about a thing. We will shoulder everything." Michael stood beside her in a crisp suit, shoulders straighter than usual, his face calm, almost smug. For once, the strain seemed gone, replaced with the confidence of a man who believed his moment had finally come. In a corner of the room, Karen sat quietly, her thick notary ledger resting on her lap, eyes sharp as she observed every detail. Beside her, Samuel adjusted his tie, a stack of documents placed neatly on the table beside him. To the relatives, they were mere formalities. To me, they were the hidden pillars of the truth. When I descended the staircase, the room fell into a hush. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, some filled with expectation, others with curiosity. I offered a faint smile, the kind that revealed nothing, and walked slowly to the long table draped in white. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady, though my heart thudded in my chest. "As promised to Michael and Clara, today I will sign the papers that will pass the burdens of this family on to the next generation. I believe it is the best way for our family to find peace." A wave of applause rippled through the room. Some nodded approvingly, others whispered to one another. Clara's eyes glittered with triumph, while Michael exhaled, his face softening, as if he had finally been recognized as the rightful heir. I sat at the table. Michael wasted no time. He slid the folder across the polished wood, opened it to the signature page, and laid a glossy pen beside it. Clara leaned forward, almost trembling with anticipation. The air grew still, thick, every breath in the room suspended as my hand reached for the pen. I let the tip hover over the line for a long moment, long enough to let them believe they had won. Then, slowly, deliberately, I signed. My script was clear, decisive, unmistakable. The room erupted. Relatives nodded, murmuring approval. Clara's smile widened to brilliance. Michael sagged in relief, and for an instant they thought the battle was theirs. But only I knew the truth of what had just been written. The applause had barely faded when I closed the folder gently and slid it toward Karen. She opened it with steady hands, her eyes scanning the fresh ink of my signature before lifting her voice so the entire room could hear. Her words fell like stones into a silent pond. The document signed by Mr. Henry Cole states that all property, bank accounts, and income shall be transferred into a trust dedicated solely to his granddaughter, Lily Cole. Management rights shall not, under any circumstance, be given to his son Michael Cole or his daughter-in-law Clara Cole. The room froze. The chatter and laughter dissolved into stunned silence. A few relatives leaned forward, whispering in disbelief. "What did she just say?" one of them muttered. Another gasped aloud. "Not to Michael and Clara, to Lily." Clara's face turned white, her lips parting without sound. The triumphant smile that had graced her moments before shattered into something jagged and desperate. Michael blinked at the papers, confusion etched across his face, as though the words had been written in a foreign tongue. I straightened slowly in my chair, my voice calm but cutting through the silence. "Yes, I signed, but not to give to the greedy. I signed to protect the innocent." Clara finally found her voice, though it cracked like breaking glass. "No, this isn't right. This isn't what we agreed. You can't—" Karen raised her hand, her tone unshakable. "This is what the signed document states, word for word, and I, as notary, confirm its authenticity." The relatives began to murmur louder now, heads turning, eyes narrowing on Michael and Clara. The tide in the room shifted, and I saw it in their faces. Respect for me, suspicion, and disdain for them. Clara's eyes darted wildly, searching for escape, for denial, but every word that spilled from her mouth only tangled her deeper. "He doesn't know what he's doing. He's confused." Samuel rose calmly, adjusting his tie, and placed his folder of bank records on the table. "Confused? Then why did you both come to me 2 weeks ago, asking about emergency guardianship, a process used only when someone lacks capacity? Were you already preparing to strip him of his rights?" Michael's mouth opened, but no words came out. His shoulders slumped as the weight of exposure pressed down on him. Clara shook her head frantically. "We were just looking into options." But the relatives had already seen enough. Their whispers now carried sharp edges: betrayal, greed, shame. And for the first time that evening, Clara's carefully built mask lay shattered before everyone she had hoped to impress. Samuel's calm voice carried more weight than any accusation. He opened his folder and spread the documents across the table. "These are official records from Columbia First Bank. Just days ago, Michael and Clara requested information on how to initiate an emergency guardianship. That process is not for helping a father with bills. It is for stripping a man of his rights entirely. They intended to declare him unfit, so that everything he owned would fall into their hands." A ripple of outrage moved through the room. Relatives leaned closer, their faces dark with shock. "My God," someone whispered. "His own son?" Clara's face flushed crimson. She slammed her hand on the table, her voice breaking. "Lies. All of it. This is just a setup to humiliate us. Don't listen." But Karen's voice cut clean through her protest, cold and steady. She held up her thick notary ledger, flipping to the marked page. "I recorded it myself. Only days ago, these two sat in this very house and attempted to pressure Mr. Cole into signing a sweeping power of attorney. Despite his clear resistance, they insisted, using his minor lapses as leverage. That is coercion, and I made note of it." The murmurs, "Stub you," elled into a storm. Heads shook in disbelief, eyes narrowed in disgust. Clara tried again, her words stumbling over each other. "No, we only wanted to help him." I rose slowly, gathering the last folder from the table. My hand no longer trembled. My voice, though low, carried through the room like a strike of thunder. "Help? Is this what you call help? For 3 years, I gave without hesitation. 35,000 to save your house. Over 7,000 to fix your car. More than 20,000 every year for Lily's schooling. 12,000 for hospital bills. 15,000 for an investment that vanished. And countless other requests. In total, more than $140,000. I opened the ledger I had compiled, each page filled with dates, amounts, and reasons. Here is every check, every receipt, every transfer, proof of how much I gave, thinking it was for family, thinking it was love. And in return, you forged plans to rob me of what little remained. The room erupted. Relatives gasped, muttered curses under their breath, some even rising from their seats in outrage. The weight of the evidence was undeniable, and the shame hung heavy in the air. Clara stood frozen, her lips moving without sound, while Michael's face sank into his hands. The last traces of defiance drained from him. I looked at them both, my words cold as iron. You thought I would sign away my life with blind trust. But tonight, before family and law, I show you the truth. You betrayed not just me, but every ounce of honor this family once stood for. Just as my words settled over the room, a soft sound broke through the tense silence, the creak of the staircase. Every head turned. Small footsteps descended slowly, hesitantly. And then there she was, Lily, clutching her worn doll to her chest, her golden hair tumbling down over her shoulders, her eyes wide and wet with fear. She stood on the last step, her small voice trembling but clear enough to pierce the crowd. "Grandpa's telling the truth. I heard Mom and Dad. They said they would take all of his money. They said it would happen after the party." The room went still as stone. You could have heard a pin drop. Clara's face drained of color, her mouth opening in shock. Michael jerked his head toward his daughter, his lips moving as though to stop her, but no words came. Gasps rippled across the relatives. "Even the child heard it?" one aunt whispered harshly. "Using their own daughter to cover such schemes? Shameful." Another shook his head, muttering, "Heartless, utterly heartless." I opened my arms, and Lily ran straight into them, pressing her face into my chest, as though she had carried this terrible secret too long. I held her close, my hand smoothing her trembling back. Then I raised my head, meeting the eyes of everyone in the room. "This," I said firmly, "is why I did what I did. Not for revenge, but to protect my granddaughter, to ensure she grows up knowing the truth, not the cruel lies that were meant to poison her against me." Clara staggered back, her hands shaking, her voice shrill. "She's just a child. She doesn't know what she heard. But the room no longer listened. Every relative's eyes burned with judgment, their whispers swelling into a storm of condemnation. Michael sank lower into his chair, his face buried in his palms, shoulders trembling under the weight of disgrace. I lifted Lily's chin gently, wiping away her tears. "You were brave to speak, sweetheart. You saved your grandfather tonight." Her small nod was all the assurance I needed, and I held her tighter, as though my very arms could shield her from every shadow that tried to reach her. Then I turned back to the gathering, my voice resonant and unyielding. "Tonight the masks have fallen, the truth has been heard, and the future of this family will not be dictated by greed, but by honor." The applause that rose then was not joyous, but solemn, an affirmation that the betrayal had been exposed, that innocence had been protected, and that justice had been served. The gathering ended not in celebration, but in judgment. Clara collapsed into her chair, her face ashen, her once proud smile stripped away. Friends and relatives who had greeted her warmly hours before now avoided her gaze, whispering behind raised hands. By the next day, the whispers would spread beyond these walls, staining her reputation beyond repair. The debts she had hidden, credit cards, overdue mortgage payments, unpaid bills, would no longer be softened by the illusion of future inheritance. Creditors would come knocking, and the doors she once flaunted so proudly would slam shut. Michael sat broken beside her, his head in his hands. For years he had leaned on me as though my love and sacrifice were an endless well. Now, with that well sealed, he looked like a man who had finally realized the depth of his weakness. His lips moved as if to form an apology, but no words emerged. Perhaps he was only beginning to understand that regret cannot erase betrayal. And yet, I could not bring myself to hate him completely. He was still my son, still Margaret's child. His fault was not only greed, but weakness. A weakness Clara had sharpened into a weapon. As I watched him crumble, I prayed silently that this fall would force him to rise differently, to find strength in honesty, rather than deceit. Clara's fate was clearer. The relative's eyes, once filled with polite respect, now burned with contempt. She had played her role too brazenly, her manipulation too cold. There would be no redemption for her in their eyes. Her name would be tied not to wealth, but to disgrace. And she knew it. Her trembling hands, her pale lips, her eyes darting like a cornered animal, betrayed the fear of a woman whose world had collapsed in an instant. But Lily, she was safe. The trust I had signed would ensure her future was untouched by her parents' greed. Every dollar, every acre, every brick of what I had built now belonged to her, and her alone. They could not touch it. They could not poison it. For the first time in years, I felt a measure of peace. That night, after the guests left and silence returned to my home, I sat by the fireplace with Lily asleep against my chest. I watched the flames flicker, casting shadows on Margaret's photo above tea. Mantle. "She's safe," I whispered, my voice thick with both sorrow and relief. "I kept my promise to you." And though my heart ached with betrayal, I knew I had done what had to be done, not for myself, but for the child who carried our family's hope. When the last ember in the fireplace dimmed, I sat in the quiet and let the weight of the night settle over me. My heart ached, not with triumph, but with sorrow for the path my own blood had chosen. Betrayal from strangers wounds the flesh, but betrayal from family scars the soul. And yet, as I looked down at Lily sleeping peacefully in my arms, I felt a fragile sense of victory, not because I had won, but because she had not lost. I thought of Margaret. Her last words still rang in my mind. "Watch Michael." She had seen the weakness I refused to see. Perhaps in some way, tonight was her voice guiding me, reminding me that love is not blind devotion, but also protection. If she were here, I knew she would smile softly, kiss Lily's forehead, and whisper that everything would be all right now. As for Michael and Clara, their journey had only begun. Clara would face disgrace, her schemes exposed for all to see. Michael, though, still had a chance. His shame was written all over his face. But within shame lies the seed of change, if he chooses to nurture it. I would not hold my breath, but I would not give up entirely. For he was still my son, and as long as blood runs through my veins, I will always leave the door open, even if only a crack, for him to return to the light. But the lesson tonight was not for them alone. It was for the entire family. Honor is not measured in wealth or inheritance. It is measured in truth, in the courage to stand against deceit, even when it comes from those closest to you. I had not acted out of revenge, though many might think so. I acted out of duty to protect the only innocent heart left untouched by greed. And as I kissed Lily's hair and carried her upstairs to her bed, I promised her silently that she would never again be a pawn in anyone's game. She would grow up knowing that her grandfather stood for her, that love could be fierce, and that honor, once defended, can light the darkest of paths. My story tonight does not end with joy, but with reflection. Family can wound, but it can also heal. Betrayal can shatter trust, but it can also remind us of the strength we still hold. And sometimes, protecting the future means standing alone against the ones you love most. If you've listened this far, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support means more than you know. Share your thoughts in the comments, and let me know. Have you ever seen greed tear through a family? Your stories give me strength to keep telling mine, so that the truths others want to bury will never be forgotten.